Did it get brighter? I don't know. It seems really similar to me. Yeah. We're going to end with a panel today of these great speakers, and Leia's also joined us to represent. Do we say Gore Kappa? Yep, Gore Kappa, to talk a little bit about their programs and how it dovetails in with what we're going to talk about. I'm going to ask everyone a question first to get it kicked off, and then there'll be some roving mics somewhere. I've lost track of them. Mandy, I might start with you. It goes in order, Mandy. It goes in order of speakers. There's nothing secret to it. I thought that was a really interesting question about data sovereignty. And I've been thinking a little bit about ICIP and how I see them as two, separate things to a degree. I'm wondering if you want to speak a little bit about maybe Eastern Mars thoughts around ICIP and how it relates to marine research. Indigenous cultural intellectual property for everyone in the audience. Don't say it quickly. Or do you not want to answer that question?
Yes and no. Yeah, that's probably the curly question. And we are developing an ICIP policy at Eastern Mars, so that's still a piece of work that's ongoing. So I'm probably not the best person. John would actually be the ideal person to speak to that, John Clark. But yeah, I think just to reiterate around some of the stuff I said earlier about someone asked about what does it mean, and we still do have to tease that out a bit in terms of what it actually means in practical terms for people. But I think it was just today raising it was just about stimulating people's thoughts around, if country hasn't been ceded, what does that mean around taking data from country and the value of data. So the value of data in terms of how it translates for industry, but also as career researchers, there's a value in that too. It translates to employment opportunities. And yet this is a realm that traditional owners have been largely excluded from historically or since colonisation. And I just really wanted to stimulate that sort of thinking. And yeah, I don't want to speak too much about the ICIP policy because we're still quite working on that. So is that?
Yeah,
yep.
Good. Mary, when you were talking, obviously, something about the marine stuff, like I grew up in the ocean and it makes me emotional. So like the pictures were, kind of threw me a little bit. But I wonder in your seabed mapping whether, there's a potential to come across like cultural heritage as well and how you plan to deal with that, I guess.
Yeah, there definitely is. And I know there's been projects in Western Australia we're a little behind, but I think that's what engaging with the Eastern Mar when we're mapping on their sea country and sharing the data with them, because a lot of that was above water during their history. So I'm sure there's a lot of cultural values.
You didn't think that was fun? No. Rebecca, I'm thinking I remember this correctly in that Phillip Island Nature Parks have projects with Bunurong on culturally significant species. I wonder if you'd like an opportunity to talk a little bit about that because it's really interesting.
Yeah, sure. We've got a very deeply entrenched reconciliation action plan at nature parks, and Bunurong Land Council have actually just signed off on a managed area all of their own at Swan Lake on the island. And that's going to be exciting to see how they develop their own programs for that location. And the Lost at Sea project is of interest, mutual interest. We co-designed it because not only the shared history with the sealers and what happened to the Bunurong people with the sealers and how people were stolen and moved throughout southern Australia, but also for the seals themselves. And we're using LiDAR drones and all sorts of other data loggers to an archaeological assessments at seal rocks to try to use it as a bit of a model for ocean inundation and storm surge that hopefully can set a bit of a case study for how that might be applied at other sites too, for assessing cultural values that can be lost under changes in sea level. Because sea level's changed before, but it's coming in quite rapidly because of our actions, and a lot of really important cultural sites are being lost because of it. So we're using seal rocks as a bit of a case study, and then hopefully it can be of benefit and more broadly.
Thanks. Simon, the bit I didn't say on the video because it would have been embarrassing was that I used to be shitting myself the whole time because you'd be crawling over the giant kelp and then you'd fall through and you'd never know what you were going to see. I got over it eventually because there was good tucker underneath. But anyway, you mentioned that there's some projects going on in Tasmania with kelp restoration. I'm assuming you're working with Mob there. I wonder what that interaction's like. And I mean, interesting in the context that there is an Aboriginal company now with 1% of the abalone fishery, which is really exciting. I wonder if you're aware of that and have any comment on the alignment.
Yeah, I guess we sort of work quite closely with the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, also the Mob on sort of Broody Island as well, Rodney. Both within the kelp and also in the shellfish reef restoration work as well. So yeah, obviously working on sea country, so it's critical to sort of engage sort of as early as possible. I believe there are sort of Indigenous Palawa divers as well that are either sort of that are involved in the sort of the outplanting of the kelp as well. And I think to go to scale and to go to scale quickly, we really need to engage with that commercial industry and sort of traditional owners as well. So yeah, it's definitely sort of critical part of our work in Tassie is to sort of work really closely with different Palawa mobs.
Cool, thanks. Leia, you haven't had an opportunity to introduce yourself before I ask you a question. Why not do it?
Thanks, Jack. My name's Leia Howes and I'm the Acting Director of Environment and Coastal Operations with the Great Ocean Road Coast and Parks Authority, Gorkapa.
Yeah, my question is going to be, I think, obviously, Gorkapa is relatively new, still, making its way in this bit of legislation on this bit of country and what that looks like. And I guess my question is around what opportunities do you see, I guess, for working with science, but also working with Mob for, I guess, progressing aspirations and obligations to sea country?
Thanks, Jack, and what a great question. And I look around the room and I see all my colleagues and I see light bulb moments with just boundless opportunities and potential. Full transparency, and I think you alluded to this, Jack, we are very new. We're under 5 years and we're incredibly new when it comes to marine management. Only recently did we take over the management obligations of marine protected areas, and we're still yet to receive our obligations in terms of the broader marine estate. So that, in a way, you could see that as a challenge, but you can also see that as an opportunity and the potential, because we'll look to sea country teams with EMAC and we'll have this opportunity to learn, listen and work and develop really deep, meaningful relationships from the get-go. And there's boundless opportunities that comes with that, and not necessarily the legacy and challenges as well. In return, I suppose there's also the potential for us to provide support and resources that are really within our sphere of control and our sphere of influence as well. So it's a yet to be determined what it's going to look like, but I think that there is incredible opportunity, and I'm sure my colleagues would second that.
Thanks, Leia, and thanks for being here. Kay, I know you think about this a bit. Don't look at me like that.
I thought I got away with it.
Okay. I guess I'm interested in your thoughts, and I know you think about this, about what are the missing elements to, I guess, there's a whole lot of terrestrial research we've talked about. I know this isn't a representative of all the marine research that exists across our landscape or seascape, but what do you think are the missing elements for us to increase that? you are allowed to say money, but that's the obvious thing.
Yes. Yes, of course, you touched on the most obvious, funding. So I think one of the things that CEC is working in partnership with various organisations located down in this region is to bring focus to the real gap in monitoring that's happening not just in marine spaces but in terrestrial spaces as well, and how this is such an iconic and important and ecologically, culturally significant landscape that it really has lacked attention in the last decade or more. And so really that is one of the biggest gaps, is really bringing that focus back down this way for a little bit.
So now we're going to throw to the floor. If people have questions, it was quick. That's good. People getting early. Roving mic behind you there, James.
Thank you for your presentations. I'm just wondering, and this is fairly new, all projects to me, to what degree are you sharing or plan to share your data so that there's a multi-layered mapping of the health of the, coastal and marine kind of space? Because there's lots of diverse projects around kelp and seal and coastal, but can you bring it together in an overall health of the area kind of map?
Yes, I think Kay is very keen at. But can I say, try and be specific about who you're asking the question to, or it will become carnage.
I think, in light with what Mandy initially said, I think the first step is really for us all to understand where we lie with data ownership. And once we can agree on that, and it actually lies with the Indigenous owners to decide what then happens with that data. But it would be amazing if we can create a platform and really start building partnerships across all of these organisations along this coastline in terms of research, monitoring, stewardship, advocacy, all those areas, if we can all pool our data, for sure. But again, that's really up to Indigenous owners, in my mind. Any comments, Mandy?
No, thanks, Kay. I really appreciate the acknowledgement of traditional owners' stake in this. And I'm not Aboriginal myself, so I work for an organisation that, has been caring for country, or people that have been caring for country since before we were here. And I think we're all interested in the same outcome, which is about looking after country. So that's definitely where our interests lie. I can speak to that. And, the work that I've done for 30 years now on Southern Right Whales, I'm getting close to retirement age. My ambition is to actually hand that work over to Eastern Mar. The Southern Right Whale Nursery that's at Warrnambool is basically the heart of the eastern population of southern right whales, which are not doing so great. There's been some stories in the media recently about the recovery of them at Head of Bight and over in the west. Very different population with different impacts and pressures. But Warrnambool is really the heart of the eastern population because it's the only place where the whales regularly come to calve. And it's been a very culturally significant species for a really long time. So my ambition is to hand that work over and all of the data and all of the information, and just to ensure that there's generations of people that are going to be working on that and caring for that species in sea country. So yeah, I think that we'll see a lot more of that sort of thing, that willingness to partner and working together. We saw lots of examples of that this morning on the terrestrial side of things. So definitely will be the same, I reckon, in the marine space.
I think it's also important to add that we do have a very unique product that will be coming out soon, which is the State of the Great Ocean Road Coast and Parks region. And I think that that's particularly important. So that's required every 5 years. And we will get our first one, our inaugural one, very soon. And that's developed by the Commissioner for Environmental Sustainability. So that will be a great opportunity to bring all of this research together. In terms of the cultural element to that, the Commission is very committed to applying the UNDRIP and all of those obligations and requirements and just being good citizens to ensure that Eastern Mar and Wotowak are really empowered through that process. So whilst the first iteration perhaps doesn't have that degree to it, there is that commitment to ensure that that is weaved through future iterations of it.
And that will inform us overall.
Yes, so they all inform each other. So, but we're quite privileged in this region that we have our own State of Environment report that will also feed into the broader Marine and Coast report as well. I'll keep it.
David and anyone else? Yeah, James, there's one up here.
I have a comment and then a question, which I was going to direct to Mandy, but maybe given what you said that you're not directly Aboriginal yourself, then maybe it's more for Jack or anyone else who's dealt with these issues. I wear a hat not just as a rainforest expert and conservation assessment officer, a job that I'm just losing through the restructure. And previous to that, I was called senior botanist in the department in the previous restructure, decided it didn't need a senior botanist either, so we don't know whether I'll still be there in 6 months' time. But I wear another hat, that is that I'm the taxon manager and the curator, botanical curator of the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas. So I have endless ongoing responsibilities in the area of naming of, in my case, plants, but it applies as much to animals. And there's been a long-standing tradition for taxonomists with whom I communicate endlessly with all the taxonomists, implementing their work into our state database. And there's been this routine practice, goes back right to the beginning, of taking Aboriginal names from all over the world and incorporating them into Linnaean taxonomy. They're either the names for genera or for species. Now, I have a very good friend, his name is Kevin Rule. He's named more Victorian eucalypts than anybody else in eucalyptological history. In fact, he'd already done this within the first 5 or 10 years of his work, and he got a AO or OA, whatever it is, medal for it. Now, I know that he plans now to name 2 new eucalypts. One of them is going to be a subspecies of Eucalyptus radiata, which we call either black or common, or it's got various different common names, narrowleaf peppermint, and he wants to name a subspecies Coolanensis because it's up in the areas within the Coolan region, particularly in the King Lake area. I've seen it in the field myself and I can see it's distinctly different. He also wants to name some eucalypt out in the west after the Kunditj Mara. And I just happen to be related to a very important family from that community. Reuben Berg is the son of a brother-in-law of mine, so I have, through that contact within my family with Aboriginal people and a lot of contact with Dave Wanden, I understand the sensitivities around the issue of appropriation. Now, using names from Aboriginal cultures is not exactly traditional appropriation, but I'd like to ask on behalf of my rather shy friend, Kevin Rule, he's asked me, he said, what should I do? And I just want to ask, what are the emerging protocols that didn't exist in the past? And to illustrate how it has been done routinely, a fungal taxonomist, Cheryl Gugurinovic, used an enormous number of Aboriginal words and names to name vast numbers of fungi, particularly in the genus the Mycenas. She also redid all of the fungi in a major taxonomic work by Clearland, long time ago, all the fungi then known for South Australia. And she renamed a lot of those. She just routinely used all these names without any concern about whether she should approach the numerous different communities from whom all those words and names in Aboriginal languages came from. So I'm just asking, what should be the emerging protocols for someone like my friend Kevin before he goes and names these new eucalypts after, in this case, tribal names, but it could also be tribal locations, or it could be other words from Aboriginal languages.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know if I could speak to sort of broad, like broad protocols, but I guess my personal advice would be talk to the mob on whose country that species occurs to start with, and actually talk to people and talk to those knowledge holders about that and see how they feel about that. And you'll find there's potentially really varying views across the country. So, for example, we call Southern White Whale Kuntabul. It's a slightly different spelling and pronunciation further west from us. And there's multitudes of different spellings depending on who recorded it and when and what they interpreted the sounds to be. So, my advice is always just go to the mob ask them, the local people that on where that species occurs. If it's if it's a species that occurs across a whole range of countries, that's a lot more challenging. But yeah, see what Mob thinks.
It's an interesting topic. Like, there's a whole lot of discussion around eponymous names of, plants and animals that have been named after people that have done some really ordinary stuff over the history. Think of the pink cockatoo and what it used to be called previously. So I think there's a whole lot of yarns that need to be had, birds in particular, but a lot of species that are slightly different to your point, David, but these are just conversations that need to be had at a local level with local people. And I don't think you're approaching local communities with a question like that is one that's likely to get you into trouble.
And I guess that can apply across all landscapes, whether it's, flora or fauna on terrestrial ecosystems or marine species with new identifications. So, yeah.
We've got one up here.
Am I good to ask? Yeah, okay, sorry. Firstly, thank you so much. It's such a privilege to hear your research stories and also stories from dreaming on this beautiful country. Such a privilege. Thank you so much. I think this question is mostly directed towards Mandy and Rebecca, but feel free to pile on. I'm happy to hear as many opinions as possible. My question is, I've heard briefly about migratory bird protection. I was wondering if there are larger picture protection projects that you're a part of or want to push for, including migratory sea mammals such as our beautiful whales.
So I'm not sure I got the full gist of your question around so are we involved or?
Are you involved,
yeah.
or is there any
Yeah. Keep coming back to southern right whale. It's my species. But Kuntapul is very, very significant to Eastern Maar and for a whole range of reasons. But it's a migratory species, feeds in subantarctic waters, migrates to the coast for breeding. There's a lot of impacts. It's critically endangered in Victoria. Nationally endangered, there's a lot of impacts that species encounters throughout its life cycle. So oil and gas exploration in the Otways Basin, which has been occurring for 30 plus years, so lots of seismic survey. We've now had the government declare an offshore wind zone right in the heart of Kuntapul country, on Eastern Maar country. And then entanglement risk from commercial fishing, vessel strike. These are the main threats. So noise, vessel strike, entanglement are the main threats. So yes, there will be in the Sea Country Plan, there will be a Kuntapul research plan. The community are very involved in this species and very vocal in protecting the species against things like seismic survey. So yeah, we'll be strong advocates for sure on mammals like that and other mammals like seals.
We at the nature parks, we're involved in a few migratory bird species, shearwaters or mutton birds, Bioden being one, and Ramsar sites are one way that there's an attempt globally to protect, their important migratory pathways. But it's quite interesting that some of those pathways that we thought were fairly well set in the birds' behaviour seem to be changing. Most recently, they're finding some birds in places that we haven't got any current records of them ever existing in as part of their migrations. So there's all sorts of changes happening that we're quite concerned and surprised by, because in the places where they're turning up, there's no food for them. So we're definitely, when it comes to activities that are planned around Ramsar sites, we're very active in trying to maintain protection of those sites.
ridiculous. Sorry, Andrea. It's a cool question, actually. It's something that I've thought about quite a lot. So Kuntapul is the southern right whale store from here. The songline that I share on the east coast with lots of different mobs is Gurrawal, which is the humpback whale, which recovery of that population has been incredible, actually. One of the things that's really interesting about both scenarios, though, is we really have some influence over what happens in Australian territorial waters, whether that's a traditional owner native title type agreement or whether that's, a department trying to work on them. There's a whole lot of impact we don't really understand going on in the southern summer range of these whales. We don't know what the impact of climate change and the breakdown of sea ice will have on the food source. And I think more and more mobs in particular are very keen to assert their obligation to look after these species right across the length of their songlines. And we'll do that. I think there's a question up.
Yeah, probably mostly directed to the Gore Kappa. And you are a new organisation, but given the predictions of the mass tourism along the Great Ocean Road and predictions of millions of people, how do you think, in terms of management of that public estate along there, how do you think you'll be able to manage that over time?
That's a really great question, and certainly something that we've been grappling with since the start of the organisation, and certainly something that actually was one of the reasons why we were established in the first place, to protect, conserve and manage the Great Ocean Road for now and for future generations to come. I think a big piece of that will come with the strategic work that needs to be done to support that type of thinking and the actions to come from that. And we are doing a sustainable visitation strategy. It is probably taking longer than what was anticipated when the authority was established. But there are some fundamental pieces that are still being developed, such as the strategic framework plan. So that's setting the 50-year vision or objective for this particular region, and more importantly, the coast and parks as well. So it's really important from an integrated planning perspective that there's strong alignment between the strategic framework plan and then a sustainable visitation strategy that will come from that, which will then feed into those tangible on-ground actions and also, consideration around carrying capacity. And, we have opportunities through our leases, licensing and permit, through tour operator licenses as well to control and change behaviours as well. So there's this whole suite of things that can come from it. We're very aware of it. We're very aware that, it's that tragedy of the commons, right? We love it so much, but we love it to death. And there is a lot of people. And we know that that is one of the key drivers that is changing our environment and will not necessarily for the better. So it's certainly at the forefront of what we know we need to do. We've got the plan to do what we need to do to get to the information. It just takes time, and we're asking community to be patient with us whilst we work to that, but also where we do have opportunity to really refine the thinking and do the actions now, we'll certainly proceed with those. But the ideal scenario is to have all the strong alignment to make sure that we're making smart decisions for our current community, but also with that line of sight for that 2100 community and beyond.
I wanted to ask Mandy, Kay, or the Great Ocean Road about eco-health. Do you have connections to do with emergencies with harmful algal blooms or avian influenza coming along this coast?
It's like a paper scissors rock.
I don't know.
Got 'em, Pam.
You've stumped us. From Eastern Mars perspective, we're sort of tapped into government's response arrangements, and we're trying to assert Eastern Mars' role in that much more strongly. So there's whale and dolphin emergencies, which I've got a strong background in, which I'm supporting Eastern Mar to get their rightful place in responding to those emergencies. And we've also been working with the state government on the avian influenza stuff, so they're planning and surveillance. Algal blooms. Yeah, I think we're really interested to see what's happening in South Australia. We've got the four of us are going on a SARDI trip on the SARDI vessel from Melbourne to Adelaide in October, and we're going to use that as an opportunity to try and learn as much as we can from SARDI. I think the conversation in the media hasn't really been enough around the causal factors. Everybody's been talking about how it's unavoidable and it's natural, and nature's got to take its course and we'll just wait for the weather to change. And it's like, no, there's actually things that can be done, and we would probably be advocating for a stronger conversation in a preventative way, I guess, what we can be actually doing to try and prevent those sorts of events from happening. Eastern Mar has a really strong interest in emergencies, declared emergencies, and are trying to assert their role in being part of that, rather than just state government sort of leading. Did you want to talk about algal?
We're at the nature parks. We're strongly involved in the surveillance for high path bird flu, because seabirds and seals are at great risk, and judging by what's happened around the world, we're expecting it to not be nice when it arrives. And so far in the seals and the shearwaters we've sampled, there's been no detection. But yeah, I also think a lot about how that will affect community when it starts, because we have so many people living along the coast that are so connected with what they see every day when they walk along the coast. And when I think about also the traditional owners in different places and how it might make them feel as well when it's all happening. So I think the response should be bigger than just how it's affecting the birds and the seals, but also how it's affecting us all emotionally.
The algal bloom thing is one of those really excellent demonstrations of what we do on land affects what happens in the ocean. And I think Indigenous knowledges will talk to that all the time. It's horrifying what's happening in South Australia. But we have to see these things as an opportunity to actually think about the positive differences that we can make individually and collectively to the way we care for the land, to see that reflected in the ocean. I'm part of the Biodiversity Council, and we're trying really hard with all the messaging that we do to not only talk about surveillance and monitoring, which we have to do, and understanding the underlying causes, but also the positive things that we can do as a community to actually be in the game, because at the moment we're sort of not. So, a tricky one, Pam. Appreciate you bringing it up.
I guess that was a really nice segue into a question that I had, really around, social science, meaning ecological science, and just wondering around that behaviour change in local communities, if there's any, programs through some of the research that a lot of you are doing into that behaviour change piece on how we can feed that into local communities.
You can look it up. It's called Bins on Boats. I had a great opportunity to work with the fishing industry. The goal was to reduce entanglements for fur seals. We'd go out to seal rocks, and in just 5 hours you'd see up to 11 seals that were entangled in various materials. And one of the main materials was fragments of netting. So we worked with industry, we developed a trust relationship, took a few years, and then we designed some special bins on the boats to capture the net fragments before going into the water. And we might see one a year now of net entanglements. maybe 3 a year, but we'd see several in a single trip. So I see that as a great success story. At the same time, there has been a reduction in the fleet of the trawl boats, but from my understanding, a lot of the time when we were doing the comparison, the effort of fishing hadn't changed a lot at that time. So I feel really positive and happy about that. Interestingly, I can get the media to pick up a story anytime when we've got seals with horrible wounds and they look awful and whoa, it's terrible. But when I put out a media release on the success of the program, only the local paper picked it up. So we have a real problem with the media helping us with our social campaigns. And I'm thinking about that quite a bit and how to improve that. But some real keys are to have some champions in the system you're working in from within that industry to find the synergies. I call it the sweet spot where you're both going to benefit from what you want to do. And sometimes you have to hide some of your goals in little masks so that everyone thinks it looks great and you're all succeeding, but you may not tell all of your story at once.
Not sure if it's behaviour change, but probably perception change. I think in Tasmania, with the Nature Conservancy, UTAS and others working with the commercial fishing industry around a solution for giant kelp has been really productive and has been really meaningful as well. Also Palawa as well, because I kind of think, I guess, commercial fishermen aren't necessarily viewed as conservationists. They may not call themselves conservationists, but they do care deeply about the health of the ocean. They do care deeply beyond the fishery. And I kind of think involving them in a practical way in which to go out there and do the outplanting, they're really the eyes and ears on the ocean. They're really going to be the future stewards once we are able to sort of restore this kelp. They're sort of involved in the control of the urchins as well. So I kind of think it's a really good example where you can actually collaborate meaningfully with industry. In this case, it's the commercial fishermen to create some positive change.
Sorry, really quickly. That my last comment there sounded a bit cheeky, and it's not. I don't really hide stuff, but I think that that's absolutely true. And fishermen generally hate seals, right? They really usually don't like them, but they very much appreciate the social license they have in fishing and people needing to buy their fish. So that's what I mean by you have to sometimes find the story that works for what you want to achieve.
I just want to add to that I think that highlights as one part of this bigger model of stewardship where we bring in like local communities that live on the land, work on the land, also all the industries and all the research partners and all the land managers. And this is really where we need to get to, is that we have a model where everyone is working together, including industry as well.
First of all, thanks everyone. It's been a great day. My question, I think sitting here listening the last few minutes and the last few questions, in a real sense, picks up that interface between science and how we can affect the social aspects and society. So I'm really asking in regard to the Great Ocean Road Authority environmental or state of the environment report, what data sets are you planning to use to inform that report?
Quick answer is hopefully all of them. Remembering the fact that that the report has been done and there was a lot of work to collect and collate the data sources against, I think, about 72 indicators that were captured or are captured within that report. And they're not just environmental indicators as well. So the Commissioner has shifted focus to include some social indicators as well, which includes stewardship, to make sure that we get a well-rounded understanding of those two elements because they're so interconnected. So There is citizen science data, there is academic data, there's data that we have derived in GORCAPA, particularly in that social interaction, all the engagements that we've done, that's data that's really beneficial for use. So when you do get it, which it's currently sitting with the Minister to be tabled with Parliament, and you flip through, you will see that there is a lot of data that is represented in this region. But equally, it will show us where we don't have data and where we actually need to put the effort, whether it is citizen science derived data or the incredible work that this collective is doing to actually feed in. So they're called the grey areas, and they're just as equally informative and powerful as the areas where you do have that data that's showing the trend, because, you know, it's okay to sometimes work in the grey.
Can we thank our panel, please? Thanks, guys. So now I'm wrapping up for the day. These guys are welcome to, you know, go get a cuppa. But I just wanted to thank all of the speakers, panelists, for coming today and making a contribution. This is obviously pretty boring if no one shows up and talks, but we appreciate, I guess, the heartfelt contributions and the dedicated hard work that goes into it. Appreciate you all for being here. You all have a role to play in this environment that we care about so deeply, and appreciate you caring enough to show up today. And I think, yeah, I'm not going to reiterate that collaboration is the key to it because it's been done to death today, but genuinely the linkages that we make and support each other in doing it, ideally without ego and all towards the same thing, will be what brings us together and sorts this mess out. But I think there's some real hopeful messages throughout the day. You can go and have afternoon tea now, and then you have to leave in half an hour. Thank you, everybody.